The wind cut different in the Montana Territory highlands. Samuel Reed learned that his first winter of 1878, when his cast iron stove died at midnight, and by morning his cabin had dropped to near freezing, despite burning half a quart of wood. He had heated exactly the way every homesteader was told to heat: small iron stove inside, periodic firing, standard and proven. By spring, he had burned more fuel than two families should need. Across the territory, settlers were fighting the same losing battle with stoves built by the book and failing by the season. Reed quietly borrowed techniques from older traditions to create a heating system that neighbors mocked as burying good money in the dirt. When the next brutal winter arrived, their cabins went cold by dawn while his stayed hot for 20 hours without refueling. What did he understand about heat and earth that every serious homesteader today ought to know? Reed had spent 12 years trapping in the Wind River Range before settling in the Montana Territory highlands. Those winters taught him that survival meant reading what the land offered, not fighting it. He had watched Shoshone hunters hollow out snow caves that stayed warm all night from body heat alone, and he had seen old mountain men build lean-tos against south-facing rock faces that captured and held the day's warmth well into the dark hours. The earth, he learned, was not something to build above, but something to partner with. When Reed filed his homestead claim in the spring of 1877, he built his cabin the way the Territorial Land Office manual instructed: raised on log sills, tight chinked walls, small cast iron stove positioned near the center. The Sears catalog promised that a Model 12 heating stove could warm 600 square feet with 2 armloads of split wood per day. The manual assured him that elevation above ground prevented moisture rot and that frequent firing kept interiors comfortable through the coldest months. The first serious cold snap that November proved every word wrong. Outside temperatures dropped to 8 degrees below zero for 5 straight nights. Reed fed his stove every 3 hours, burning through seasoned pine and oak at a rate that would exhaust his winter supply before January. Yet by dawn, frost formed on the inside of his windows. Water left in a tin cup near the stove developed a skin of ice. His boots, placed 2 feet from the firebox, were stiff with cold each morning. Reed's nearest neighbor, Thomas Brennan, suffered worse. Brennan had arrived from Ohio the same season and followed identical building practices. His cabin sat on higher ground with better drainage, exactly as recommended. During the same 5-day freeze, Brennan's interior dropped so low that his sourdough starter died, and his seed potatoes froze solid in their storage sacks. Brennan restoked his fire 4 times each night, yet still woke shivering under 2 wool blankets and a souse bearskin. 3 cabins down the valley from Reed, the Kowalski family faced disaster. John Kowalski had immigrated from Poland with experience in European timber framing, but he built to American frontier standards once he reached Montana. When the cold snap hit, his wife Maria counted 16 separate trips outside for firewood over 2 days. Their infant son developed a persistent cough that lasted weeks after the freeze passed. Maria later told Reed that she spent those nights holding the baby close to the stove, afraid he would not survive until morning. The pattern held across the territory. Every settler following proven methods burned excessive fuel for inadequate warmth. Reed calculated that his neighbors collectively consumed enough wood to heat twice their number using the methods he remembered from his trapping days. During those long, cold nights, Reed recalled conversations with an elderly German mason named Klaus Weber, who had worked construction jobs around mining camps. Weber often complained that American settlers built like summer people in winter country. He described thick-walled masonry stoves from his homeland that burned once per day and radiated heat until the next evening. Weber claimed his grandmother's village used earthen walls that stored heat like giant stones, releasing warmth slowly through the night. Reed also remembered a Crow elder named Running Wolf who had traded with mountain men near Yellowstone. Running Wolf once showed Reed the remains of ancient pit hearths, carved into hillsides, lined with flat stones, and covered with earth. "Fire heats the rocks," Running Wolf explained. "Then rocks heat the people for many hours." The elder described winter lodges built half underground, their floors warmed by buried coals that burned low and steady until dawn. These memories converged into a simple question: If earth and stone held heat better than air and wood, why did frontier wisdom insist on heating air and wood? Reed began his experiment the following spring. Instead of positioning his stove inside the cabin, he dug a circular pit 3 feet across and 2 feet deep just outside his south wall. He lined the bottom and sides with flat sandstone gathered from a nearby creek bed, fitting the stones tightly and sealing gaps with clay mud. The pit resembled the ancient fire rings Running Wolf had described, but Reed adapted it for his cast iron stove. He purchased a length of stove pipe and constructed a short tunnel connecting the stone-lined pit to his cabin interior. The tunnel, also lined with stones and sealed with clay, allowed heated air to flow indoors while keeping the firebox itself buried in earth. A separate chimney, built from stacked stones and extending above ground level, carried smoke safely away from both pit and cabin. The innovation drew immediate skepticism. Brennan visited during construction and declared the project foolish waste of good digging time. He argued that burying a perfectly good stove invited rust, moisture damage, and poor combustion. Stoves belong indoors where you can tend them proper, he insisted. That pit will flood with the first hard rain and ruin everything you put in it. Other neighbors shared Brennan's doubts. Sarah McNeil, who ran the small trading post 12 miles down valley, predicted that Reed's underground fire would create dangerous gas buildup. "You'll poison yourself with smoke backing up through that tunnel," she warned. Jan Kowalski examined the stonework and shook his head. "In Poland, we build stoves high, not low," he said. "Fire rises, heat rises. You fight nature with this digging." The criticism stung because Reed respected these people. They had successfully farmed, raised families, and survived multiple frontier winters. Their skepticism carried weight precisely because it came from demonstrated experience, not ignorance. Yet Reed had also survived 12 winters in conditions that killed unprepared men. He trusted what he had learned from indigenous practices and immigrant traditions more than he trusted advice from recently arrived farmers. The question was not whether his neighbors were wrong, but whether conventional frontier wisdom matched the environment they now inhabited. By autumn of 1878, Reed's buried stove system was complete and ready for testing. The approaching winter would determine whether traditional knowledge could outperform established practice, or whether his investment in stones, clay, and labor had produced merely an expensive failure that justified his neighbors' skepticism. The first test came in early December of 1878. Reed lit his inaugural fire in the buried stove as evening temperatures dropped toward 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The flame caught quickly in the stone-lined pit, and heated air began flowing through the connecting tunnel into his cabin interior. Within 2 hours, the main room reached a comfortable 60 degrees. But as Reed prepared for bed, he discovered a critical flaw in his design. Cold air seeped steadily through gaps where his cabin floor met the foundation logs. The raised construction that territorial manuals recommended for drainage now created a pathway for freezing wind to flow beneath his floorboards. While his buried stove warmed the air above floor level, the space under his feet remained brutally cold. Reed could feel the chill rising through the wooden planks, negating much of the heat gained from his underground system. The problem extended beyond mere discomfort. Moisture from the warming interior air condensed on the frigid floor surfaces, creating damp spots that would inevitably lead to rot. Reed realized that heating the cabin's air meant nothing if cold earth beneath continued to draw warmth downward through the floorboards. The buried stove solved one problem while exposing another that conventional wisdom had ignored. Reed examined his neighbors' cabins and found identical issues. Thomas Brennan's raised floor allowed wind to whistle freely underneath, creating drafts that no amount of indoor firing could overcome. The Kowalski cabin, built on higher ground for better drainage, suffered worse cold infiltration because elevation increased wind exposure beneath the structure. Every homestead following standard practices leaked heat downward through inadequately sealed foundations. During his trapping years, Reed had sheltered in earth-banked structures built by French voyageurs along the Missouri River. These traders constructed winter quarters by excavating shallow depressions, laying log foundations directly in the earth, then packing clay and soil around the base logs, until ground level reached the cabin floor. The technique eliminated underfloor air circulation entirely while using earth contact for thermal stability. Reed also recalled detailed conversations with Klaus Weber about European pithouse construction. Weber described Polish and German villages where families spent winters in dwellings built partially underground. "We dig down 1 meter, build walls up 1 meter," Weber had explained. "Earth keeps cold out, keeps heat in, no wind under floor because no space under floor." Weber claimed these semi-subterranean homes stayed comfortable through alpine winters using minimal fuel. The solution required extending his buried stove concept to the cabin foundation itself. Reed began excavating around his existing cabin, removing soil from beneath the raised floor structure. The work proved backbreaking in frozen ground, but by late January he had carved out enough space to lower his cabin floor to ground level. He then implemented the earth banking technique learned from Voyager practices. Reed mixed clay soil with water to create thick, moldable mud, then packed this material tightly around the base logs where they met the earth. He built up the clay banking until it formed a seamless seal between foundation and ground level, eliminating every gap where cold air had previously infiltrated. The clay mixture required precise consistency for effectiveness. Too wet, and it would freeze and crack during cold snaps. Too dry, and it would not adhere properly to the logs or compress into airtight seals. Reed experimented with different ratios, eventually settling on 3 parts clay-rich soil to 1 part water, mixed with chopped grass for binding strength. This combination hardened into a durable barrier that flexed with temperature changes without losing its seal. Reed extended the earth banking technique to create thermal continuity between his buried stove system and cabin foundation. He constructed a gradual earthen slope connecting the stone-lined pit to the clay-sealed foundation, effectively embedding the entire cabin base in thermally stable soil. This earthwork transformed the cabin from a structure sitting above ground into a structure integrated with ground. The thermal effects became apparent during the next major cold spell. Outside temperatures dropped to 5 degrees below zero for 3 consecutive nights, identical conditions to the previous year's disaster. But Reed's cabin interior maintained 55 degrees throughout each night without any refueling after the evening fire. More significantly, his floor surfaces remained above 40 degrees, warm enough to walk barefoot comfortably. Reed measured the temperature difference by placing metal cups filled with water at various locations inside his cabin and in Brennan's unchanged cabin next door. In Brennan's cabin, water near the floor froze solid each night. In Reed's earth-integrated cabin, floor-level water never dropped below 38 degrees. The earth banking had eliminated the thermal drain that rendered conventional heating ineffective. The insulation effect exceeded Reed's expectations. Earth contact provided thermal mass that absorbed heat during warm periods and released it during cold periods, creating natural temperature regulation. The clay ceiling prevented heat loss, while the earth banking stored thermal energy from both the buried stove system and solar heating during sunny winter days. Klaus Weber visited during construction and immediately recognized the principles at work. "This is old way from my country," he said, examining Reed's clay banking technique. "My grandfather built like this in mountains of Poland. Ground stays warm when air goes cold. You make cabin part of earth. Earth helps cabin stay warm." Weber contributed additional refinements based on European traditions. He showed Reed how to create expansion joints in the clay banking using thin wooden strips that could be removed after the clay hardened. These joints allowed the earthwork to settle and adjust without cracking, maintaining the thermal seal through multiple freeze-thaw cycles. The success challenged fundamental assumptions about frontier construction. Neighbors had believed that raising cabins above ground was necessary to prevent moisture damage and ensure proper drainage. Reed demonstrated that direct earth contact, properly managed with clay sealing and drainage considerations, actually improved both thermal performance and structural durability. By spring of 1879, Reed's integrated foundation system had proven itself through the harshest winter conditions. His cabin remained consistently warm using approximately 40% less fuel than conventional methods required. The earth banking showed no signs of moisture damage or settling problems. Most importantly, The system required no daily maintenance or frequent refueling that made conventional heating so labor-intensive. The foundation and earth integration had transformed Reed's experimental buried stove from an interesting novelty into a comprehensive heating system that worked with natural thermal principles rather than fighting them. Reed discovered a new problem during the spring thaw of 1879. His buried stove and earth-integrated foundation maintained steady heat through the coldest nights, but the cabin interior temperature still swung dramatically between evening and morning. When he lit the fire each evening, the main room quickly climbed to 65 degrees or higher, often becoming uncomfortably warm within an hour. By dawn, despite the improved foundation, interior air had cooled to 48 degrees. The temperature oscillation created practical difficulties. Reed found himself constantly adjusting clothing, opening and closing his single window, and timing daily activities around the heating cycle. More critically, the rapid temperature swings caused condensation problems as warm, moist air met cooling surfaces each night. His few books began showing signs of dampness, and metal tools developed surface rust despite being stored indoors. Reed realized that heating air was inherently unstable. Air warmed quickly, but also cooled quickly, creating the boom and bust cycle that made frontier heating so inefficient. His neighbors suffered identical problems despite different stove configurations. Thomas Brennan's cabin swung from sweltering to frigid each night. The Kowalski family reported that their children kicked off blankets during the evening heat, then shivered before dawn. The solution came from Klaus Weber's detailed knowledge of European masonry heating traditions. Weber had worked as an apprentice mason in the German states before immigrating to America, learning construction techniques passed down through centuries of alpine winters. He described massive tile stoves called Kachelofen that German and Austrian families built into the centers of their homes. These stoves, they are not like your American iron boxes, Weber explained to Reed during a spring visit. We build them from heavy stones, thick clay, sometimes 2,000 pounds of material. You make fire inside once per day, very hot fire. The stone and clay, they drink up all the heat. Then for next 20 hours, the stones give back heat slowly, slowly. Always warm, but never too hot. Weber sketched the basic principle on a piece of bark using charcoal. European masonry stoves consisted of thick walls surrounding a firebox, with the heavy materials absorbing intense heat during combustion, then radiating that energy gradually over many hours. The thermal mass acted like a heat battery, charging quickly but discharging slowly. Reed recognized the logic immediately. Stone held heat far longer than air or metal. During his trapping expeditions, he had often warmed himself against sun-heated rock faces that remained warm hours after sunset. Canyon walls stored solar heat all day, then released it through the night, creating microclimates that could mean the difference between survival and freezing. Indigenous peoples had applied this principle for generations. Reed recalled seeing ancient fire rings where native hunters had heated large stones, then moved the hot stones into sleeping areas or cooking pits. The heated rocks provided steady warmth for entire nights without maintaining active fires. European settlers had simply scaled up the concept using masonry construction. Weber offered to help Reed build thermal mass into his existing cabin. They began by constructing a heavy stone bench along the cabin's north wall, directly opposite the tunnel entrance where heated air flowed in from the buried stove. The bench measured 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches high, built from sandstone blocks mortared together with clay-based mortar. The construction required precise stonework to maximize thermal mass while maintaining structural integrity. Weber showed Reed how to select stones of uniform density, avoiding pieces with cracks or soft spots that might fracture under thermal stress. They fitted each stone tightly against its neighbors, creating continuous thermal pathways that allowed heat to spread evenly through the entire mass. The mortar recipe proved critical for thermal performance. Weber mixed local clay with sand and chopped grass in specific proportions, 4 parts clay-rich soil, 2 parts coarse sand, 1 part finely chopped prairie grass. This mixture hardened into joints that expanded and contracted with the stones during heating cycles, preventing cracks that would reduce thermal efficiency. Reed and Weber completed the north wall bench in late summer, then added a second thermal mass along the east wall. This second bench incorporated an innovation Weber remembered from his apprentice days. They built hollow chambers within the stonework, connected by small passages that allowed heated air to circulate through the interior of the mass before exiting into the cabin. The internal air passages multiplied the surface area exposed to heated air from the buried stove system. As hot air flowed from the underground tunnel, it traveled through the hollow chambers within the stone benches, transferring heat to the masonry from inside as well as outside. The design maximized thermal transfer while creating a more complex heat distribution pattern. Weber also taught Reed to build thermal mass at different heights within the cabin. They constructed a lower bench along the floor level where people would sit or sleep, and a higher ledge at shoulder height that would radiate heat toward the center of the room. The multi-level approach created convection currents that circulated warm air more effectively than a single thermal mass could achieve. The first test came during an early cold snap in October. Reed lit his evening fire and observed how the thermal mass affected interior temperatures. The stone benches absorbed heat rapidly as hot air flowed through their internal passages. Within 3 hours, the masonry surfaces reached temperatures comfortable to touch, but not burning hot. More importantly, the thermal mass stabilized the cabin's temperature swing. Instead of rapid heating followed by rapid cooling, the interior temperature rose gradually to 62 degrees and remained between 58 and 62 degrees throughout the entire night. Reed measured the difference by placing thermometers at various locations and checking them hourly until dawn. The fuel savings exceeded expectations. With thermal mass storing and releasing heat gradually, Reed needed only one substantial fire per day instead of the multiple smaller fires required by conventional methods. The stone benches continued radiating comfortable warmth for 18 to 20 hours after the fire died, maintaining interior temperatures that required no additional heating until the following evening. Klaus Weber examined the results with professional satisfaction. "Now you have real heating system," he declared. "Not American way, fighting the cold with more fire. European way, catching the heat and keeping it." The masonry benches had transformed Reed's cabin from a space that battled temperature extremes into one that maintained thermal equilibrium through natural heat storage and release. By winter of 1879, Reed's integrated system combined 3 complementary principles: earth integration for foundation stability, underground combustion for efficient fuel use, and thermal mass for temperature regulation. The combination created heating performance that surpassed anything conventional frontier methods could achieve. Reed discovered a dangerous flaw in his system during the first week of December 1879. The thermal mass benches worked perfectly for temperature control, but the combination of his buried stove tunnel and sealed foundation created a deadly problem with indoor air quality. Smoke and combustion gases began seeping into the cabin through the connecting tunnel, especially when outside winds created pressure changes that reversed the normal airflow. The first incident occurred during a windstorm that lasted 3 days. Gusting winds created shifting air pressure around Reed's cabin, sometimes pushing air down through his stone chimney and forcing smoke backwards through the tunnel system. Reed woke one morning with burning eyes and a persistent cough, finding a thin haze of smoke throughout his interior, despite the fire having died hours earlier. The problem worsened when Reed realized that his earth-sealed foundation, designed to prevent heat loss, also prevented fresh air circulation. The same clay banking that eliminated cold drafts now trapped stale air, moisture, and combustion byproducts inside the cabin. His single window provided insufficient ventilation exchange, especially during winter months when opening it meant losing precious heat. Klaus Weber recognized the symptoms immediately when he visited Reed in late December. "This is old problem from my country," Weber explained, examining the smoky residue on Reed's stone benches. "When you make house too tight, bad air stays inside. In Germany, we learn to separate the smoke path from heat path, and we make small holes for fresh air that do not waste heat." Weber described traditional European solutions developed over centuries of masonry stove use. German builders constructed separate flue systems that carried smoke directly outside while allowing heat transfer through different pathways. They also incorporated controlled ventilation openings that permitted fresh air exchange without significant heat loss. The solution required rebuilding Reed's chimney system to completely isolate smoke removal from heat transfer. Weber showed Reed how to construct a dedicated smoke flue using a technique called double-wall chimney design. They built an inner flue pipe surrounded by an outer stone sleeve, with the space between filled with clay and sand for insulation. This double-wall approach allowed the inner pipe to carry smoke and combustion gases directly outside, while the outer stone sleeve absorbed heat from the exhaust gases and radiated it slowly into the cabin interior. The design separated dangerous gases from useful heat, solving both air quality and thermal efficiency problems simultaneously. Weber also taught Reed to install what German masons called Luftzieher, or air pullers, small adjustable vents positioned strategically around the cabin to create controlled air circulation. They installed one vent near the floor level on the cabin's east wall and another near the ceiling on the west wall, positioning them to create a gentle cross-flow of fresh air that would not interfere with the thermal mass performance. The ventilation vents incorporated ingenious design features borrowed from European mountain construction. Each vent consisted of a wooden frame holding thin slate slabs that could be adjusted to control airflow volume. During extreme cold, the vents could be nearly closed to minimize heat loss. During milder weather, or when air quality problems developed, they could be opened wider to increase circulation. Reed learned to construct clay plugs that could seal the heat tunnel after each fire, preventing backdraft while preserving thermal transfer. These plugs, made from the same clay mixture used for foundation banking, fit precisely into the tunnel opening and could be easily removed when needed. The plugs allowed Reed to control airflow through the tunnel independently from the chimney system. The clay plug technique required careful timing and temperature monitoring. Reed learned to insert the plugs while the tunnel still contained heated air, but after active combustion had ended in the buried stove. This timing captured the maximum amount of heat in the thermal mass, while preventing any smoke or gas infiltration during the overnight period. Weber introduced an additional refinement based on his masonry experience: a heat recovery ventilation system using stone chambers. They constructed small stone boxes near the chimney base, with air passages that allowed incoming fresh air to pass near the warm chimney stones before entering the cabin interior. This arrangement preheated incoming air, reducing the thermal penalty of ventilation. The heat recovery chambers worked by channeling fresh outside air through curved stone passages built into the chimney foundation. As cold air flowed through these passages, it absorbed heat from the warm stones, arriving inside the cabin at temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than outside air. The system provided necessary fresh air without the shocking temperature drop that made ventilation so costly in conventional cabins. Reed tested the improved ventilation system during a January cold snap, when outside temperatures remained below zero for 6 consecutive days. He monitored air quality by observing candle flames, which burned steadily and cleanly throughout the test period, indicating adequate oxygen levels and proper air circulation. The controlled ventilation eliminated smoke infiltration while maintaining comfortable interior temperatures. The moisture control benefits proved equally important. Reed's earlier system had created condensation problems as heated air cooled against cold surfaces. The new ventilation arrangement removed excess humidity before it could condense, keeping cabin surfaces dry and preventing the mold growth that plagued many frontier dwellings during extended cold periods. Reed measured the effectiveness of his air quality improvements by comparing his cabin's conditions with those of his neighbors. Thomas Brennan's cabin continued to suffer from stuffy air and occasional smoke problems from his conventional iron stove. The Kowalski family reported persistent condensation on their windows and walls, leading to ice formation and eventual wood rot around window frames. By contrast, Reed's cabin maintained clear air, dry surfaces, and comfortable breathing conditions throughout the winter. The combination of separate smoke removal, controlled ventilation, and heat recovery systems created an indoor environment that supported both human health and structural durability. The ventilation innovations completed Reed's transformation from experimental buried stove to comprehensive heating system. His cabin now combined earth integration for thermal stability, thermal mass for temperature regulation, and controlled air management for health and safety. The system addressed every major challenge of frontier heating while using traditional principles adapted to local conditions and materials. Klaus Weber pronounced the final system superior to many European installations he had known. "You have built better than my grandfather's house in the old country," he told Reed. "This system, it knows how to keep people warm and safe together." The ultimate test arrived in January of 1880, when a polar weather system settled over the Montana Territory and refused to move. For 11 consecutive days, daytime temperatures never rose above 10 degrees below zero, while nights plunged to 25 degrees below zero. Supply wagons carrying split wood from the valley mills could not navigate the frozen trails, leaving homesteaders dependent entirely on their personal fuel reserves. Reed faced the crisis with confidence in his integrated heating system, but his neighbors confronted potential disaster. Thomas Brennan had accumulated what he considered adequate fuel for a normal winter, approximately 4 full cords of mixed pine and oak. Jan Kowalski had cut 5 cords, believing his larger family required additional reserves. Both men calculated their supplies based on previous winters using conventional heating methods. On the second night of the deep freeze, Brennan's cabin interior dropped to 18 degrees despite burning wood continuously for 14 hours. His cast iron stove glowed red hot during active firing, but radiated no warmth once the fuel burned down. Brennan's children huddled together under every available blanket while ice crystals formed on the interior walls near their breathing spaces. The Kowalski family suffered worse conditions. John's conventional stove consumed nearly half a cord during the first 3 days, as he desperately tried to maintain livable temperatures. Maria Kowalski moved their infant son's cradle directly against the stove, wrapping him in wool and fur, while she fed wood every 2 hours through the night. The baby developed a rattling cough that persisted despite her efforts to keep him warm. Reed documented his system's performance with methodical precision during the crisis. He lit one substantial fire each evening at approximately 6 o'clock, burning seasoned oak in the buried stove until the stone chimney showed strong heat signatures. The thermal mass benches absorbed and stored the combustion energy over 3 hours, reaching surface temperatures of 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit by 9 o'clock each evening. Throughout each night, Reed's cabin interior maintained between 52 and 58 degrees without any additional fuel input. The stone benches continued radiating stored heat for 20 hours after each fire, providing sufficient warmth for cooking, daily activities, and comfortable sleep. Reed measured indoor temperatures using a mercury thermometer positioned away from direct heat sources, recording readings every 4 hours around the clock. The fuel consumption differences proved dramatic. Reed burned approximately 1/3 cord during the entire 11-day crisis, less wood than Brennan used in 3 days. Reed's integrated system extracted maximum thermal energy from each piece of fuel through the buried combustion chamber, then captured and slowly released that energy through the thermal mass storage. The controlled ventilation system prevented heat loss while maintaining air quality. Klaus Weber visited multiple cabins during the cold snap to assess comparative performance. He found that conventional stoves wasted enormous amounts of fuel through direct heat loss up chimneys and through uncontrolled air infiltration around poorly sealed foundations. "American stoves, they eat wood like hungry animals," Weber observed. "Reed's system, it drinks heat like wise man drinks water, slowly and completely." The crisis revealed fundamental flaws in territorial heating wisdom that had never been challenged systematically. Conventional methods assumed that frequent, intense fires could overcome any cold conditions through brute force fuel consumption. Reed's system demonstrated that thermal storage and controlled release provided superior comfort using dramatically less fuel. Sarah McNeil, who operated the trading post, visited Reed's cabin on the 7th day of the freeze to witness his system firsthand. She found Reed's family engaged in normal daily activities, cooking, mending clothes, and reading, while wearing only light indoor clothing. The contrast with other cabins, where families remained bundled in heavy coats and blankets, convinced her that Reed had achieved something genuinely revolutionary. By the 9th day of the crisis, Thomas Brennan faced fuel exhaustion. His remaining wood supply would last perhaps 2 more days using conventional firing methods. Brennan approached Reed requesting emergency assistance, expecting to borrow fuel. Instead, Reed offered to teach Brennan how to construct basic thermal mass using stones from the creek bed. Reed showed Brennan how to build a simple heat storage bench against his cabin's interior wall, using the same clay mortar techniques Klaus Weber had taught. They positioned flat stones to create thermal mass directly opposite Brennan's conventional stove, allowing radiated heat to charge the stone battery during active firing. The improvised thermal storage extended Brennan's remaining fuel supply through the final 3 days of the freeze. Jan Kowalski observed the emergency construction and requested similar assistance. Reed helped Kowalski seal foundation gaps using packed clay banking around his cabin's base logs, eliminating the cold air infiltration that wasted so much heating energy. The foundation improvements, combined with careful timing of fuel consumption, allowed the Kowalski family to survive the crisis without dangerous fuel shortages. Word of Reed's success spread through the scattered homestead community during the following months. Families who had struggled through the 11-day freeze began visiting Reed's cabin to examine his integrated heating system. They found technical solutions that could be adapted to existing structures without complete reconstruction. The adoption process followed predictable patterns. Younger homesteaders, particularly recent immigrants familiar with European masonry traditions, embraced thermal mass construction most readily. Established settlers initially resisted changes to methods they had used successfully in milder climates, but gradually incorporated individual elements like foundation sealing and controlled ventilation. Reed began teaching systematic construction workshops during the spring and summer of 1880. He developed standardized plans for buried stove installations adapted to different cabin sizes and soil conditions. Reed also created detailed guides for thermal mass construction using locally available materials, sandstone, clay deposits, and prairie grass for mortar binding. Klaus Weber emerged as Reed's primary technical partner in disseminating the heating innovations. Weber established a seasonal masonry business focused on building thermal mass installations for homesteaders throughout the territory. He trained apprentices in the clay mortar techniques and stone fitting methods essential for effective heat storage construction. By autumn of 1880, 7 homestead families had implemented complete or partial versions of Reed's integrated heating system. These early adopters documented fuel savings ranging from 35 to 60% compared with their previous conventional methods. More importantly, they reported dramatically improved comfort levels and indoor air quality throughout the following winter. Reed's innovations had evolved from desperate experimentation into proven technology that could be taught, replicated, and adapted to various frontier conditions. The integration of indigenous earth heating wisdom, European thermal mass traditions, and practical frontier materials had created heating solutions superior to conventional territorial methods while using resources more efficiently and sustainably.